I never thought I'd wake up like this. Alone. With a single key sitting on the counter beside me, like it was nothing more than a forgotten trinket. I've always been a man who values routine, predictability, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of what I woke up to. It's funny, isn't it? How things can fall apart without you even realizing. How everything can seem perfectly fine on the surface while underneath, the foundation cracks, unnoticed, until it's too late. I'd been walking around in a fog for weeks, maybe even months, and then one morning I simply found myself here. I didn't even expect it to happen the way it did. I remember the night before, clearly now, even though at the time it just seemed like any other evening. Rachel and I sat on the couch, watching some movie we had seen a dozen times. She laughed at the same parts, I chuckled at the same jokes. But there was a distance, an invisible gap growing between us that neither of us acknowledged. Not a word was spoken about it. She didn't ask how my day was. I didn't ask how hers had gone. We simply existed in the same space, as two separate people who used to be one. But that night, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I stayed up late, just thinking. About everything. About her, about us. And then, for the first time in months, I decided to do something different. I got out of bed, grabbed my jacket, and walked to the kitchen. The silence felt heavier than usual. I looked at her phone, sitting face down on the counter. I thought about checking it, just for a second. I didn't. But the thought lingered. I went back to the bedroom and found her asleep, lying still, her back facing me as it always did. I don't know why I looked at her like that, but I did. I felt something, emptiness maybe, a sense of finality, like the night had ended long before I had even gotten into bed. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to take me, but it didn't. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder. The minutes stretched into hours. I didn't sleep at all that night. And then the morning came. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why, but I left. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting or accusations. No bags packed in a frantic rush. There was just silence. I stood in the kitchen, my hand gripping the keys to the house, and for a moment, I thought about what I was about to do. I thought about all the things I hadn't said, all the things I could have said, but I didn't. I just set the keys down on the counter, and I walked out. There was no confrontation, no dramatic exit. Just a man who had reached the edge of something and, for once, didn't look back. But I didn't realize what was truly happening until later. It wasn't the leaving that changed everything. It wasn't the silence that followed. It was the realization that the woman I thought I knew had been gone long before I ever left that morning. And what I had missed, what I had failed to see in the weeks, months, or even years leading up to that moment, was far more than just a broken relationship. It was a mystery, a web of lies, secrets, and betrayal that had been woven slowly, methodically, until I was caught in it without even realizing. And as I walked away, I had no idea that my life was about to become something I didn't recognize. The first few days after I left felt almost surreal. There was no immediate rush of emotions, no sudden surge of freedom or relief. Instead, there was this oppressive quiet, as if the world had simply stopped turning. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, like I was stuck in a moment that refused to end. It was hard to explain, but I felt as though I had made the right decision, and yet, every passing second made me second-guess myself. I found myself walking aimlessly through the streets of the city, passing by places that used to hold memories for Rachel and me. Cafes, parks, restaurants. I couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness when I passed them. I kept seeing her face in every corner, every shadow, as though she was always there, lingering, watching me. It was maddening. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all of them pulling me in different directions. Why hadn't I seen the signs earlier? How had I missed it? Could it have been avoided? Or had it all been inevitable? But the truth was, I didn't know what was worse, the constant questioning of my own actions or the unbearable uncertainty of what had happened to her. The woman I thought I knew was now a ghost in my mind, a phantom of the life we'd shared. I tried to push these thoughts aside, tried to bury them deep. It's easy to tell yourself that walking away was the right choice when you're alone, away from the emotional chaos of the situation. But when the silence surrounds you, and there's no one left to answer your questions, the doubts only grow louder. And then came the phone call. It was late, far too late for any normal call, and I almost didn't pick up. I don't know why I did, but something inside me told me I had to. I remember my fingers shaking as I brought the phone to my ear, half expecting it to be Rachel. But it wasn't her. It was a man's voice. A voice I didn't recognize, but one that sounded oddly familiar. "Is this Tobias?" the man asked, his voice calm but clipped, like he had rehearsed the words. I hesitated, confused. "Yes. Who is this?" There was a long pause before the man spoke again. "I need to talk to you. It's about Rachel." My heart skipped a beat. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't prepared for this. The last thing I expected was someone calling me with news about her. I didn't even know how to react. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's Rachel? What's going on?" The man sighed. "I can't say much right now, but it's important that you hear me out. Rachel's in trouble, and you need to know what's been happening." I felt my blood run cold. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I had just walked away from the woman I loved, from everything I thought was real, and now this stranger was telling me she was in trouble? My first instinct was to hang up, to walk away from this unknown situation. But something stopped me. Some part of me, the part that had always cared for her, knew that I couldn't ignore this. I didn't know it yet, but this phone call would be the first of many steps into a world I never imagined. "Meet me tomorrow," the man said, his tone more insistent now. "I'll explain everything. If you want to understand what's really going on, you need to come. It's about Rachel." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to walk away, to tell this person to leave me alone. But I couldn't. "Where?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll send you the details," he said, and with that, the line went dead. For a long while, I just stood there, holding the phone, staring at the screen as if it might reveal something more. My mind was a blur of confusion and fear. What had happened to Rachel? Why didn't she reach out to me herself? Why was this stranger involved? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of urgency, though I couldn't quite place the source of it. The phone call replayed in my mind over and over, the man's words echoing like a haunting whisper. I tried to go about my day, to focus on the things I had planned, but nothing seemed right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake by leaving so suddenly, by cutting ties without understanding what was truly happening. I waited for the message. It came around noon, just as I was beginning to think maybe it had all been a mistake, a cruel prank. The text was brief. "Meet me at the old cafe on Pine Street. 2 p.m. Don't bring anyone." I glanced at the clock. I had an hour. My stomach twisted with nerves, but there was no turning back now. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew I needed to go. As I drove toward the cafe, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What would I find there? What was this man going to tell me about Rachel? I tried to picture her, to imagine what had happened in the days since I left. Was she really in trouble? Or had this all been some elaborate scheme, a game I was being dragged into? The cafe was small and unassuming, tucked away in a quiet part of town I hadn't visited in years. I pulled up and parked across the street, staring at the faded sign above the door. I sat there for a while, unsure of what to do next. Was I really ready to hear what this man had to say? Was I ready to face whatever consequences were waiting for me? But there was no more time for hesitation. It was time to find out the truth. And as I stepped out of the car, I had no idea that what I was about to uncover would change everything. The cafe was more rundown than I remembered. It had once been a cozy spot, filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the chatter of regulars, but now it seemed abandoned, as though it hadn't seen a customer in years. The windows were fogged up, and the peeling paint gave it a ghostly, forgotten feel. The sign that once proudly advertised fresh pastries and local brews now hung crookedly, like an afterthought. There was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I stepped inside. The place was empty. At least, it appeared to be. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the room, and I could just make out the faint outline of a figure sitting at the farthest corner. His face was obscured by the low brim of a worn-out baseball cap, and he didn't look up when I walked in. I hesitated for a moment, the door's bell still ringing faintly in the silence, and then I made my way toward him, my footsteps slow and measured. As I approached the table, I saw him glance up. His eyes were dark, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. There was a heaviness to his gaze, something that made my pulse quicken. I wanted to ask him a million questions right then. Who he was, why he was involved, what had happened to Rachel, but I knew better than to jump in too fast. There was a method to his madness, and I had to play along, at least for now. Sit, he said abruptly, gesturing to the chair across from him without waiting for a response. His voice was deep, gravelly, as if it had been worn down by years of stress. I did as he asked, lowering myself into the chair. The air between us felt thick, charged with unspoken tension. I didn't know if I was more afraid of the answers he might give or the ones he might leave unspoken. I'm assuming you've been wondering what's going on, he began, his eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned forward. About Rachel. About everything. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know where to start. I had so many questions swirling in my mind, but none of them seemed to matter at that moment. I just needed to hear something. Anything that would explain the chaos that had suddenly overtaken my life. The man exhaled sharply, as though he'd been expecting my silence. Rachel's been in deep with the wrong people, he said, his tone flat but serious. People you don't want to know about. And it's been going on longer than you think. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. What do you mean, the wrong people? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the table. I didn't want to get involved, but when things started spiraling out of control, I had no choice. I had to step in. His eyes bored into mine, his gaze unwavering. You were too close to her, Tobias. You didn't see it, but I did. I saw the way she changed. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Changed how? I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. The pieces were starting to fit together in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. Rachel wasn't just some innocent photographer chasing her next project, he continued, his voice darkening. She got tangled up in something dangerous. And I'm not talking about art galleries and photo shoots. I'm talking about people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. My stomach lurched. What are you saying? I asked, my voice trembling now. That she was involved with criminals? The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it carefully on the table between us. The envelope was unmarked, plain, but there was something about it that made my pulse spike. Take a look, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. You need to understand exactly what you're dealing with. I hesitated for a moment, but I knew there was no turning back now. With a shaky hand, I opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photos. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at the images. There were several of Rachel, but these weren't the carefree, artistic photos she used to take for fun. These were different. They were taken in places I didn't recognize, with people I didn't know. There were photos of her sitting in dimly lit rooms, talking to men whose faces were obscured by shadows. In one, she was handing something to a man in a leather jacket, something small, something wrapped in a cloth. In another, she was laughing with a group of strangers, their faces smiling but their eyes cold, calculating. I stared at the pictures, unable to process what I was seeing. My mind raced. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. The man watched me, waiting for my reaction. When I didn't speak, he sighed. It's been going on for months, Tobias. Maybe longer. She got pulled into something big. And now they've made her a part of it. Whether she wanted to be or not. I could feel the walls closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to demand that he tell me more, that he explain everything, but I couldn't. The weight of the photos, the reality of what they represented, was suffocating me. And where is she now? I asked, my voice hoarse, barely audible. The man's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a second. I can't tell you everything, but she's in hiding. The people she's involved with, they know she's trying to get out. They're looking for her, Tobias, and they won't stop until they find her. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, pressing down on me. I felt like I was drowning in them, each sentence pulling me deeper into a world I didn't belong in. I didn't want you to be dragged into this, the man added quietly. But now you're in it whether you like it or not. And if you want to find her, if you want to help her, you're going to need to do things you never thought you'd do. I sat there, stunned, the room spinning around me. My world, the life I thought I knew, was crumbling. I was no longer just dealing with a relationship falling apart. I was dealing with something much darker, much more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And now, I had to decide. Was I willing to step into this new reality? Was I willing to risk everything for a woman who might not even be the person I thought she was? The man stood up, his chair scraping across the floor, his voice cutting through the silence one last time. You want to know the truth about Rachel? Then you're going to have to be ready for what comes next. Because it's not going to be easy, and you might not like what you find. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving me in the midst of my confusion, the photos still lying in front of me. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to change forever. The journey into this new world had just begun, and it was going to be a hell of a ride. I didn't know what to make of it. Everything the man had said was too much to process. I sat there for what felt like hours, the photos still spread across the table in front of me, my mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. Rachel, my wife, a woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with. How had she become someone who was involved in this dark world? I couldn't reconcile the woman I knew with the one the man had described. It felt like a cruel joke, but there was no punchline, just the cold reality that she had been hiding something from me, something that had changed everything. I left the cafe in a daze, my mind in turmoil. The images of Rachel's secret life burned into my memory. The quiet street outside seemed strangely silent, as though the world was holding its breath. I could barely focus on where I was walking, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me like a stone in my chest. It was almost as if the streets themselves were mocking me. How could I not have seen it? How could I have missed all the signs that were now so painfully obvious? I walked for what felt like miles, my thoughts racing faster than my feet. I kept thinking about the man's last words. If you want to help her, you're going to need to do things you never thought you'd do. What did that even mean? I wanted to believe there was some way I could fix it, some way to undo everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no turning back now. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't unsee what I had learned. The deeper I got into this, the more I realized there was no way to get out without risking everything. I barely made it home that night. The familiar walls of the house felt alien now, like a stranger's home I'd wandered into. I could almost feel Rachel's absence, the coldness of her absence pressing in on me from every direction. I hadn't seen her in days, hadn't spoken to her, but somehow, it felt like she was still here, lurking in the shadows of the house. I didn't know where she was, what she was doing, or who she was with. And that was the scariest part. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling as I hovered over her contact. I hadn't tried to reach out to her since I left. Part of me had wanted to, but I didn't know what I would say, or if she would even respond. The silence between us had become so thick, so suffocating, that I wasn't sure there was any way to break it. But now, everything had changed. The man's words echoed in my mind. You want to find her? You want to help her? Then you need to know what you're really up against. I had to do this. I had to find out what happened, even if it meant diving into the unknown. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I had no idea who to trust anymore, who was on Rachel's side and who was working against her. But there had to be someone who knew more, someone who could help me understand what I was getting into. Then I remembered the envelope. The photos. There had to be a lead in there somewhere. One of the faces. One of the places. Something that would give me direction. I grabbed the envelope from the table and started going through the photos again. I studied every detail, every shadow, trying to pick out something I had missed the first time. And that's when I saw it. In one of the photos, there was a man I hadn't noticed before. He was standing in the background, his face partially obscured, but his eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. There was something about him, something familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. He looked like someone I had seen around town a few years ago. He was part of a group I used to avoid, the kind of people you saw in the shadows, the ones you never really knew but always knew to stay away from. A cold chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some random person Rachel had met. This was someone dangerous, and he was tied to everything. I grabbed my jacket and headed out again, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The feeling that time was running out was suffocating, pressing against my ribs. I knew that tracking down this man could lead to answers, or it could lead me further down a path from which there was no return. But there was no choice now. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Rachel disappear into this world without a fight. I drove through the winding streets, trying to remember where I had seen him. The city felt different now. Every corner I turned, every face I passed, seemed to hide some unknown danger. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that someone was following me, that someone was always one step behind. Finally, I pulled up in front of an old, run-down building on the edge of town. It looked abandoned, but I could see lights flickering in the windows. This was it. I wasn't sure what I was about to find, but it felt like the right place to start. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with tension, the kind of air you feel just before something happens, before the storm breaks. I approached the building, my heart thudding in my chest. I didn't know if this was going to be the breakthrough I needed, or if it was going to lead me deeper into a web I couldn't escape. But I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. I knocked on the door, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, a voice from inside answered. "Who's there?" My pulse quickened as I responded. "I'm looking for someone. I think you know who I'm talking about." The silence on the other side of the door stretched for what felt like an eternity. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, waiting for any sign that someone was on the other side. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. The air around me seemed to grow thicker, and I could feel the weight of every possible outcome pressing down on me. My hand trembled slightly as I stood there, my knuckles still resting on the door. What was I doing? Did I really think this would give me answers? Finally, the voice spoke again, low and gruff, but this time with a hint of curiosity. "Who's asking?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question, but I didn't hesitate. "I'm looking for a man. Someone you know. Someone connected to Rachel." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought about walking away. The doubts, the fear, the uncertainty, it all crept back into my mind. Was this a trap? Was I about to walk straight into something I couldn't control? But I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything I had learned. "I don't know what you're talking about," the voice said flatly, but I could hear the subtle shift in its tone. The man knew exactly who I was talking about. I didn't back down. "I know Rachel's involved in something dangerous, and I know you're connected to it." I paused for a moment, searching for the right words. "I'm here because I need answers. I need to find her." The door creaked as it slowly opened, and I took a step back instinctively. A figure emerged from the shadows, standing in the doorway. He was tall, his features hard and unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating. He was the type of man you wouldn't want to cross, the type who exuded danger without even trying. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in the way he stood, in the way his eyes narrowed as they fixed on me, that made me feel like I was about to make a grave mistake. "Rachel," he repeated, as if weighing the name. "I don't know what you think you know, but you don't want to be here." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not leaving until I get some answers. I want to know where she is, what she's involved in." The man studied me for a moment, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He didn't want to help me, but there was a wariness there too, like he wasn't sure if I was someone he should be afraid of. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lowering. "You're way out of your depth, kid." He glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting someone else to show up. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I had no idea what I was dealing with. I had no idea what Rachel had gotten herself into. And worse, I had no idea how deep it went. "I'm not leaving without her," I said firmly, trying to mask the fear that was creeping into my voice. The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't get it. You don't understand what you're asking. Rachel's not the same person you knew." I took a step forward, determined to make him see that I wasn't backing down. "I don't care what she's become. I care about what happens to her now. I'm not walking away until I know she's safe." There was a long, tense silence. The man's gaze flickered to something behind me, and for a moment, I thought I heard a faint sound from inside the building. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. "If you're so determined to get involved, then come inside. But understand this, you're in over your head." I didn't hesitate. I stepped past him into the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke, and something else, something metallic, like the scent of blood. The room was sparsely furnished, the walls cluttered with half-finished sketches, stacks of paper, and old furniture that had seen better days. It was like walking into a forgotten corner of the world, where time had stopped and nothing was as it seemed. The man shut the door behind me, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of my decision settle around me. There was no turning back. Whatever was about to unfold, I was in it now. "Sit down," the man said, gesturing toward a rickety chair by the table. I complied without saying a word, my mind racing with questions I couldn't put into words. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. He took a seat across from me, his eyes never leaving me, as if he was studying me, assessing me, trying to figure out how far I would go. "I don't know what you think you're going to find here," he said finally, his voice quiet but serious. "But Rachel's not the person you think she is. She never was." I stared at him, confused, a dozen different thoughts colliding in my head. "What do you mean? Who is she?" The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and detached. "She got involved in something she couldn't get out of, something dangerous, and now she's trapped. All I'm doing is trying to keep her alive." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What is it? What's going on? What's she involved in?" The man's expression darkened, and he glanced at the door behind him again, as if checking for someone else. He hesitated before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's bigger than you think. Bigger than her. If you're smart, you'll walk away now. Because once you know too much, there's no coming back." I sat there, my mind reeling. What could be so bad that this man was warning me away? What had Rachel gotten herself into? And more importantly, how far would I go to save her? Before I could say anything more, the man stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I can't say any more right now," he said, his voice growing tense. "But if you're serious about finding Rachel, then you need to listen carefully." He turned and walked to a drawer in the corner of the room, pulling something out. When he returned, he tossed a small, unmarked envelope onto the table in front of me. "This is the first step. Take it. But understand this. If you open that envelope, there's no turning back. Whatever happens after that is on you." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the envelope. I knew what it meant, the point of no return. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. And as I did, I realized that the moment I opened it, I would be stepping into a world darker than anything I could have imagined. I held the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of it as though it carried not just paper, but everything I was about to lose. The man had already warned me. There's no turning back. But I couldn't help myself. The fear, the uncertainty, it didn't matter. I had to know. I had to understand what had happened to Rachel, what had happened to the woman I thought I knew. The room was still, the only sound the faint rustling of the envelope as I slid my fingers over its edge, feeling the smooth paper. The man didn't speak, didn't move, just watched me silently, as though waiting for me to make the final decision. His eyes, though cold and distant, seemed to carry a hidden warning. But the truth was, I was already too deep. There was no going back to the life I had before. I tore open the envelope slowly, the sound of the paper splitting filling the silence. My breath caught as I pulled out a single photograph. At first, I didn't understand it. The image was grainy, taken in poor light, but I could make out a street corner, an alleyway. And in the center of the frame, there she was, Rachel. But she wasn't alone. Two men flanked her, their faces obscured by shadows. And there was something in their posture, something about the way they stood near her, that felt wrong. Dangerous. The cold chill that had been lurking in the back of my mind spread over me again. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. She had crossed a line, and I was standing on the edge of it. I stared at the photo, trying to process it. My mind kept racing, trying to connect the dots. Who were these men? Why was Rachel with them? The question that followed, the one that I hadn't wanted to ask, but couldn't stop myself from thinking, gnawed at me. Was she willingly involved in this? The man across from me leaned in, watching me closely, like he was studying my reaction. "Do you see now?" he asked, his voice low but thick with meaning. "This isn't just about a few bad decisions. This is a web, Tobias. A very, very dangerous web." I couldn't look away from the photo. I didn't want to ask, but I had to. "Who are they?" My voice was barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond immediately, as if the question itself was a weight he didn't want to carry. Finally, he spoke, his words measured. "You don't want to know their names. You don't want to get caught in the storm they've created. But Rachel, she's right in the middle of it. She got involved with the wrong people, people who don't care about her, people who will do whatever it takes to get what they want. And now, you're tangled up in it too." I felt like the room was closing in around me. What had Rachel gotten herself into? What had she done? And what did that mean for me? I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent, staring at the photo. The room was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of every moment that passed. My mind churned with all the possible outcomes, none of them good. Was there a way out of this? Was there a way to save her without risking everything? The man shifted in his seat, breaking my thoughts. You want to help her? Fine. But know this, you can't save her if you're dead. His eyes locked onto mine, his gaze steely. You don't have the luxury of time. The people she's involved with, they're not like you or me. They don't hesitate. They don't care about who gets hurt along the way. I exhaled sharply, my mind racing with the terrifying realization that I had no idea what I was dealing with. I didn't know who these people were, what they wanted, or why Rachel had gotten involved with them. But I knew one thing. I had to make a choice. And whatever that choice was, it was going to change everything. Tell me what I need to do, I said, finally lifting my eyes to meet his. My voice was firm, even though every part of me was screaming to walk away. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Not with Rachel out there, in the middle of all this. Not with the photo in my hand, staring back at me. The man studied me for a long moment, his lips curling into a half smile. You're smarter than you look. But that doesn't mean you'll get out of this clean. He stood up abruptly, walking toward the far corner of the room. I watched him, my heart hammering in my chest, as he rifled through a pile of papers. He pulled out another envelope, thicker than the first, and dropped it on the table in front of me. This, he said, his tone shifting slightly, contains everything you need. The locations, the people, the next step. If you want to find Rachel, you'll need to follow the trail. And trust me, it's a dangerous one. I stared at the envelope, the weight of it almost suffocating. Inside that envelope was the key to everything I needed to know. But I had no idea where it would lead me, or what it would cost me. He turned toward me again, his eyes hard. And once you open that, there's no going back. You'll be in this for good. I swallowed, my throat dry, and I reached for the envelope. I could feel the gravity of the moment pulling me forward, the need for answers outweighing every instinct to turn around and run. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a map. It was marked with several locations, places I didn't recognize, and none of them looked safe. My fingers shook as I traced the lines, trying to make sense of it all. There were notes written on the margins, cryptic messages that only added to the confusion. But one thing stood out above everything else, an address. It was circled, highlighted, and at the bottom of the page, a note in bold, scrawled handwriting. She's there. Don't trust anyone. I stared at the address, my mind spinning. This was it. This was the next step in finding Rachel. But the further I went, the deeper I sank into this mess, the more I realized something. There was no going back. Whatever happened now, I was in this. I stood up, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I knew what I had to do. But as I walked toward the door, something gnawed at the back of my mind. The man's words echoed in my head. You'll be in this for good. I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming next. But as I opened the door and stepped back into the cold night air, I knew I had already made my choice. And there was no turning back. The night air was colder than usual as I stepped out into the street, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me, each breath coming out in short, ragged gasps. The world around me seemed to blur as I walked, the distant hum of the city and the flickering streetlights failing to distract me from the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. The address on the map was burned into my brain, but the closer I got to it, the more uncertain I became. I was about to walk into a world I didn't understand, a world I hadn't been prepared for. I didn't know what Rachel had gotten herself into, or how deep it ran. I had spent so many years thinking I knew everything about her, about us. But now, with every step I took, I realized just how little I truly understood. This wasn't about saving a marriage anymore. This was about survival. My survival. Her survival. And whether I was ready or not, I was already neck-deep in something far darker than I could have imagined. The map led me to a rundown part of town, an area that was long forgotten by the rest of the city. The buildings were old, their windows shattered or boarded up, the sidewalks cracked and overrun with weeds. The kind of place people avoided, even during the day. It looked like something out of a nightmare. I checked the address again. This was it. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood in front of a dilapidated building, the address now glowing eerily in the dim light of the street lamp overhead. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should even be here. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around, to leave this place and never look back. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not when Rachel's life, and possibly my own, were hanging in the balance. I had come too far to back out now. I walked toward the entrance, my footsteps echoing in the empty street, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The smell of mildew and decay hit me almost immediately, and I had to fight the urge to cough. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out at me from the shadows. But there was nothing. No movement. No sound. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door groaning behind me as I let it close. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and foreboding, with only the faint glow of a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling to guide my way. The air was thick, suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was waiting for me to make my move. I walked carefully down the hall, my eyes scanning every corner. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and I winced at the sound, praying it wasn't loud enough to alert anyone nearby. I reached the end of the hallway and stood in front of a door that looked like it had been untouched for years. The paint was chipped, the wood warped. It seemed so out of place here, so different from everything else in this forgotten building. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What was waiting for me on the other side? Was this some kind of trap? Was I walking right into the hands of the people who had taken Rachel? But the need for answers burned too strongly. I couldn't turn back now. I gripped the knob and twisted it, the door opening with a reluctant groan. I stepped inside, my heart in my throat. The room was small, furnished with little more than a few dusty chairs and a long table in the center. A single lamp lit the room dimly, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. And there, sitting at the table, was a figure I recognized immediately, the man from the cafe. His face was set in a hard, unreadable expression, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. "You made it," he said, his voice low and calm, like he wasn't at all surprised to see me standing there. I didn't say anything. My heart was racing, and the adrenaline coursing through my veins made my head spin. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. "You're here because you think you can save her," the man continued, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "But I need to be clear with you, Tobias. There's no saving Rachel. She made her choice long ago." I felt like the floor dropped out from beneath me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He looked at me for a moment, his eyes calculating. "Rachel chose this life. She knew exactly what she was getting into. And now, you're here, trying to fix something that's already broken beyond repair." I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. This wasn't the woman I knew, the woman I married. She wouldn't have chosen this, would she? But as I looked at the man in front of me, the doubts started to creep in. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded, my voice growing more desperate. "Why not just leave me in the dark? Why drag me into this mess?" The man leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied me. "Because you're too far gone now. You've already opened the door, Tobias. There's no turning back. The people she's involved with," he paused, his expression hardening. "They'll come after you. And when they do, they won't stop until they get what they want." I swallowed hard, the fear rising in my chest. The thought of Rachel being pulled deeper into this world, of her being surrounded by people like this man, terrified me. "What do you want from me?" He sighed, a long, drawn-out exhale, before he stood up and walked to the far side of the room, pulling a drawer open and retrieving something that gleamed in the dim light. It was a small, metallic object, too shiny to be ignored. He set it down on the table in front of me with a soft clink. It was a key. "This is your next move," he said, his voice low and steady. "You'll use this to get the answers you want. But know this, whatever you find, it won't be what you expect. It never is." I stared at the key, my hand trembling as I reached for it. What had I gotten myself into? As I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal, I realized that the answers I was searching for were closer than I thought. But the path ahead would be even darker than I had imagined. And there was no going back. I stood there for a long time, staring at the key in my hand, unsure of what to do next. The man's words echoed in my mind, each one more daunting than the last. "Whatever you find, it won't be what you expect." The key felt heavy, as though it represented more than just a physical object. It was a turning point, the culmination of everything I had been through, everything I had learned. And yet, in that moment, it was just a key, a small, insignificant thing, at least on the surface. But in reality, It was the one thing that could unlock the door to my future. I took a deep breath, my pulse still racing, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. But as I stood there, staring at the key, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the resolve that had been building up in me since the moment I first discovered Rachel was missing. Maybe it was the overwhelming need to get answers, to finally understand what had happened to the woman I loved. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the realization that I had come too far to turn back now. I slipped the key into my pocket, standing up straight, and making the decision then and there that I wasn't going to let fear dictate my actions. I wasn't going to let the past, the mistakes, or the darkness cloud my judgment any longer. I had come to this point for a reason, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. With determination in my step, I turned and walked toward the door. The man watched me, his expression unreadable, but I could see something flicker behind his cold eyes. It was like he knew what I was about to do. He knew I had made up my mind. I didn't need him to tell me what to do anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was going to find Rachel. I was going to get her out of whatever mess she had gotten herself into. And no one, not the shadows lurking behind this dark world, not the criminals, not even the fear that gripped me, was going to stop me. I left the building, my steps firm, my heart lighter than it had been in days. The key in my pocket felt like a promise. A promise to Rachel. A promise to myself. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I wasn't fighting in the dark. I had the strength of my resolve, and that was enough. The night air felt different now, less oppressive. The streets, though still unfamiliar, didn't seem as threatening as they had before. The world was still dangerous, and I knew there were obstacles ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Real, tangible hope. I could do this. I could get her back. The next morning, I followed the map, the directions on the paper, and soon I found myself at the very place I needed to be. There was no turning back now. This was the moment. I knocked on a door, old, weathered, but with a certain strength about it. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Rachel. She stood there, her eyes wide with surprise, and I could see the relief flood into her face as she recognized me. But there was more. There was something new in her eyes, something that wasn't there before. A spark of life. A recognition of the man she had once known, the man who had never given up on her. Tobias, she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe I was really there. She stepped forward, and before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly, not caring about anything else in that moment. She was safe. She was here. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice shaky. I never wanted you to get involved in all of this. I never meant for it to get so far out of control. I pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, to reassure her that it was okay. You don't need to apologize, I said softly. We're here now. Together. That's all that matters. Rachel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to escape the people I was working with. They had me trapped, Tobias. But you came. You found me. I never gave up on you, I said, the words coming out more easily now. I never will. And in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The darkness, the danger, the uncertainty, it was all gone. There was just us. Just the two of us, standing together after everything we had been through. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still dangers, still people who would try to pull us back into the chaos. But we had each other. And together, we could face whatever came next. As we walked out of that place, side by side, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the city. It was the first light of a new beginning. A chance at something better. A chance to rebuild. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. I smiled because I knew that, despite everything, we had made it. Together. We had found our way back to each other. And that, I realized, was all that really mattered.